something very special to this discussion since she was actually in the box. So Jennifer.
Welcome.
First of all, thank you all for coming. I never thought I'd spend a Wednesday night with anybody that wanted to listen to what happened in SHU. So thank you all for coming. For 5 years, I was known as 06G 0708. That was my DIN number. If you're assigned one, when you go into Bedford as a woman, not that you come out as not a woman, but you're given a DIN number and that's what you're known as. Nobody calls you by your first name, they'll call you by your last name. I want to read to you what was on my parole board appearance report. It says, for my disciplinary, inmate Smith has incurred 1 Tier 3 disciplinary disposition for unauthorized exchange, smuggling, vandalism, stealing. She receives 2 months and 8 days SHU and 3 months recommended loss of good time. Those of you that don't know, in New York State, if you have a non-violent crime, you're eligible for good time. It's 2 months for every year. So being that my sentence was a 5 to 10, my minimum amount of good time that I could get was 10 months, which meant I got to go home 10 months earlier than my 5 years. In New York, if you do SHU time, you have to do 60 days in order to lose your merit time. So you earn it and then they take it away. I did 68 days. I'd like to read to you my ticket for why I went to SHU. It says on the above date and time, I, COD Schwimmer, under direction of the chart sergeant, was ordered to frisk the cell of inmate Smith, looking specifically for new white socks. During the search, I found 1 pair. The socks were identified by Val Banks, the recreation director, as the socks missing from the ILC inventory. The area sergeant was notified and inmate Smith was escorted to SHU with no further incident. Socks were placed in the contraband locker. I lost 10 months of good time for being a good inmate, never having a ticket in 4 years, to losing all of that for a pair of socks. That's what the ticket says. What it doesn't say is that every day for my time in SHU, the Dep of Security, the Dep of Programs, and the superintendent would stand outside my cell and ask me about other inmates because they wanted information on people that they could not get. And being that I was a good inmate, they thought I would tell. I'd like to think I'm mentally stable, that nobody grows up saying they want to go to prison. However, you know, everyone has certain things in life that happen and you deal with your consequences. But to go to a place where they put you in a room for 23 hours a day and your rec consists of being put in a cage at 6 a.m. And for those of you that don't know where Albion is, it's between Rochester and Buffalo, which is the snow belt. While I was in SHU, it was winter. So at about 32 degrees at 6 a.m. when they brought me out for my rec, my hour of fresh air was freezing. You go outside, you can only wear 1 pair of socks. I wasn't allowed to take my contraband socks with me. If you're caught with wearing 2 pairs of socks because you're given a pair of Keds, which are thin canvas sneakers, your rec time is taken from you. As previously stated, while people are in SHU, a lot of times you're pushed to see if they can make you break. They walk around in the morning and they do what's called go around.
Literally this is how they talk.
And if you miss what I just said, that's how they speak there. And go around is when you ask for your shower, you ask for your rec time. So if you miss the officer speaking like this, you don't get your shower, you don't get your rec time. Your meals are delivered through slots. Your book card that comes around once a week is magazines that are 2 years old, books that I like to read, and I never heard of half of the books that came around on that card. Officers there will push your buttons. You know, you'll be yelling, you know, you missed me for my shower, and now you get 3 more months to sit in there because you yelled out your door. The women that I was in a certain block. I think it was 16 cells. You don't see anybody, talk through vents to communicate. When I first got into New York State's DOC, their mission statement was care, custody, and control, which is appropriate for how they do things. But for my opinion, to do 2 months, given 3 months for a pair of socks, that just doesn't make any kind of sense. And this is what goes on a daily basis. You're never going to know how many people go to SHU or, you know, do keep block time, which is slightly milder, for infractions that are kind of made up. And, you know, you're found guilty, you can appeal, but by the time you appeal, they're so sick of hearing about you from your letters that you write every day that they just want you out. And then at that point, everything is lost. It would take you longer to appeal what they put you in there for than it would to actually get anything done. So most people give up, myself included. It was a no-win situation because the more you grumble about it, the more they watch you, the more little things like being late on a movement. Oh, well, they'll put you right back in there, and you're just like, oh boy, here we go. And one of the things I found ironic was when you first get in, they give you a book, and the book is all the rules. And they basically tell you this whole book is what you're supposed to follow. And if you break any of them, we will put you in SHU. So you find out very quickly what SHU is. And I facilitated for probably about 3 years, which is basically orientation. Hi, welcome to prison. This is what you can do. This is what you shouldn't do. This is what's going to happen to you when you go to SHU, if you go to SHU. And the women that are there are in SHU, I should say, they're lonely. They don't get to speak to their families. People that would normally probably stabilize them, they're cut off from completely. And SHU is supposed to be a deterrent, I think. But some women go in as a badge of honor. Their girlfriend that they've met in jail or prison or wherever is now going to SHU for you. So, you know, I did that much for you, I love you that much, I went to SHU. And when you hear that, you think that's just, I don't think that's not normal, but that's not rational thinking. So how do you put somebody who's irrational in place and expect them to sit with themselves for 23 hours a day and come out with the right answer? It doesn't really happen. But again, I thank you all for coming out here and for having an interest in this. There are people that, as was stated, that max out in SHU. They don't care, they don't want to go back into population. And then they leave there and then they come out to general society and there's no transition period. So the first person that angers them, that looks at them funny, because you're in a box for 23 hours a day by yourself, you do get paranoid. You start to hear the go around call even though it's not happening. You start to not know what time it is because you sleep all day because there's nothing else to do. I think I played so much solitaire, I don't ever want to see the game again. But it is I believe it's a means of control that's used by prison officials because they can. You're an inmate, so obviously you're not meant to be in society. You did something that got you there, and we're going to teach you a lesson. And they used it as a manipulative tool. And for me, my option was to just sit and do the time, or to, you know, I would say rat people out because I still don't know if the information that they wanted would have done anything. The really ironic thing was all the information they wanted, they packed up in my property. So it was in their closet the whole time. But they didn't look through it because they wanted me to tell them what they wanted to know. And I'm proud to say that those women that they wanted me to kind of quote-unquote rot out are all advocates for prison reform. Because most of us were the most vocal ones there. We were the ones that said, look, we're supposed to be able to get outside library books. Can we get that? And they didn't like that because that meant we could think. And that meant the rehabilitation was kind of a rock. It's resocialization. You are in a place with people you probably wouldn't normally socialize with in a situation that is controlled to such an extreme that it's, you know, it's just not normal. It's not anything that's conducive to somebody coming out and saying, okay, I'm going to, you know, make a change. I'm going to better myself. You're in a permanent timeout that if you don't have the wherewithal going in, you're not going to get it coming out. And again, I just thank you all for coming out here, for wanting to make a difference. Hopefully, just, you know, spreading the word that there are things that we pay for as taxpayers. I can say that now. That need to change. And it's, everybody talks about all the debates that are going on and the politicians that are out there, but it's the smaller things that made this country, that built it up, and those are the people that really do make a difference. So thank you all for coming out, taking the time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we have some time. I'm going to ask for those who wish to say something very briefly about their own experiences or those of their family to please stand. Please stand. Those who wish to speak briefly, please stand. Adam, you.
We have someone who's here who has someone in the CMU unit, but I think she's feeling shy and doesn't want to speak. But I know that there are many, many people, and if there are others who wish to speak about your family's experience.
You can't hear you, man. Can't hear you.
Yeah, well, I didn't expect to speak, but are you sure, sister, that you don't want to speak?
Are you sure you will? I think we're in a safe place. I hope so.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi, greetings of peace, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing your stories. I'm here from Michigan State University, actually, but I have a brother in prison on the war on terror, incarcerated on the war on terror, for translating materials, publication, website publication. It was translated from Arabic to English, and so the religious stuff and political stuff that came under surveillance, I guess. So he was in solitary confinement for 3.5 years. He was in New York City for a couple of months in the summer of 2006, and then his trial was in Atlanta, Georgia, where he was in solitary confinement for 3.5 years, and he got hit in the head with a big whole kind of issue where he was unable to, or he did not want to leave his cell for a couple of months because he was afraid of getting hurt, and he was in solitary confinement 24 hours. Now he's in one of the CMUs, the communication management units. There are two kind of special prisons where they're in group isolation, basically, Muslim prisoners, and they put in some animal rights and environmental rights activists as well right now. And there have also been involved in these prisons around religious restrictions that the Muslim prisoners are facing. They're not allowed to pray 5 times daily prayers in congregation, and so there's a lawsuit around that. And then the 2 CMUs were actually created in secret, so there's another lawsuit by CCR questioning the legalities of their existence. But anyhow, so that's kind of my story that I really appreciate. Jennifer's story sharing about it was very powerful, and I guess keep all of them in your prayers. Thank you so much.
It is now time for questions. Do I have cards? You just have 2. Wow, here's 3.
We have to do it on the card.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Trying to organize the situation. Okay. There's one more coming? Okay, okay, I'm going to, there aren't that many questions here. Is there anyone else? I'm going to ask specific questions. I don't see these questions directed to anyone in particular. So, anybody who wants to take the crack at them, please do. Let me see. Describe the reason for SHU. I guess that's you called eyeballing. Describe the reason for SHU called eyeball.
That's an infraction, I believe, that you give for,
Oh, could you stand up, please? Okay.
what I believe when a female officer walking down the tier, and it was an inmate, there's a male inmate watching her, and the officer deemed that it was a sexual watch or look, you get reckless eyeball, and put you in the shoe for that.
Oh, wow. Didi, you know NYS Docs has received monies from the federal government to build shoe prisons? Does anyone know the answer to this? Okay,
Well,
go ahead.
so I think New York did receive funding to build the facilities that have isolation units. I actually have the numbers here that are actually included in the report, but between 1996 and 2000, New York received $200 million in federal funding to construct upstate correctional facility and facilities that are referred to as the SHU 200s. They have isolation beds in them. So yeah, New York has received funding.
Here's a question. What can be learned from the successful campaigns in the two states mentioned? I think that's Maine and Mississippi, in the interest of changing these practices in New York. What are they doing right that we should be doing? Does anyone answer that?
I think the first key thing that they did right is that they realized that there was a problem with the use of extreme isolation. And in New York, the commissioner, Brian Fisher, has acknowledged that there's an overuse of extreme isolation. So that's a starting point for a discussion about reform. And then the states have, Maine and Mississippi, have analyzed whether they're overusing it and then moved from there. So we're at that stage right now, I think, with the reports that are out, and not just in New York, but across the country, about the use of extreme isolation.
I'm just going to add that I think something that's driving a lot of this in a lot of states is the budget factor. It's much more expensive to have to hold prisoners in isolation than it is just regular prisons, and a lot of states have cited budget factors as driving their decision to phase out the use of solitary confinement. There's another large prison in Illinois called TAMS that had about 900 people that had been in solitary for close to 20 years, and the governor there just announced that he was going to close TAMS later this year. And he kind of sold it as a budget, a money-saving tool.
I have an open-ended question here. Why does the NYCLU not call for the end of solitary confinement for this time period? Why is there no global campaign to stop it, or is there such a campaign?
Yeah, well, prisoner separation has been an accepted correctional practice for many years. There are instances where you do want to have the ability to isolate a prisoner, especially if there's something called protective custody, where you want to put a prisoner in isolation because they're being targeted and they might be threatened with violence. So it's a measure that can be used to protect people. The problem used in an arbitrary way, and the purpose of it is punishment. There's no protection, there's no rehabilitative goal behind the use of disciplinary solitary confinement.